I've been briefed to speak to you about doing business differently. And I have had a pretty unusual career, I guess, and that's why I've always done things differently, because I've had a very unusual career. And let me give you a snapshot on what that's about, and there'll be learnings in that along the way, I promise. And then we'll go into courage, kindness, optimism, and fun, which I believe are the only ways to do business. So, when I first left school, I worked as a jillaroo. In Australia, that is like a farmhand or a cowgirl. And when I am Prime Minister, every kid who leaves school will have at least a year to do that in primary industry. It is essential for some good, solid, physical, hard work. It knocked the princess out of me, which was the best thing ever. But it also taught me incredibly useful skills in my life, like how to gallop a horse downhill, how to cut hay in a tractor, and how to build fences. And to this day, when I see a row of fencing, I think of it as a thing of beauty, because it is so incredibly hard to build fences. So that was an awesome thing to do when I first left school. Then I came back to Sydney, where I lived. I was born in Africa but raised in Australia, and went back to Sydney, went to uni, hated every minute of it, dropped out after 4 weeks, and was really lucky to get a job in an advertising agency. Now, we'd had an Apple IIe since I was 10 years old, and I could type really fast, which is unusual in 1991. And I got this great job in an agency, and my boss said, "Lucy, you got that job because you can type fast and you can talk fast." And I was only in that role for 8 months, but I learned a huge amount about communication, particularly in the not-for-profit sector. And I worked for clients like, I worked on the World Vision 40-hour famine, one of the first famines that they launched in the Australian market. And I worked for the Salvation Army and Amnesty International, and I learnt so much in that time. And then my career, which had only just got going, I was out of school for less than a year, when I had a massive motorcycle accident on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So I like to choose iconic symbols if I'm going to have a massive life-changing stack, and I stacked it on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I had 14 reconstructive operations to stick me back together. I was in hospital for a year, a week and a day, and it brought my life to such a grinding halt for that period of time. In the end, what saved my right leg was surgery they'd been doing since World War II. My right leg didn't have enough blood supply, so they used my left leg as a donor, and they grafted my legs together, which is not very funny when you're a highly promiscuous 19-year-old. I think my mum actually arranged it. So then I was a mermaid for a month. And then they surgically separated my legs. My right leg stayed pink, and I got to keep it. But during that year, it was so tough. I was turning 19. I had just left school. I had so many ambitions. Life was grand. I was living in an apartment with a friend, riding a black shiny motorcycle, and everything came to such a sudden halt. And I could have been incredibly anxious about what my future held, and I could have worried about losing my leg and everything that was going wrong and everything that was out of my control. But for some reason, and I'm still not sure why, for some reason I focused on fantasy rather than anxiety. I had hours to while away in hospital. This was before the internet. This was before even decent daytime television. And I just had hours to kill. It was actually boredom that nearly killed me in that year, rather than all the surgery. And so I relied on fantasy. I would dream up things to do when I got out of hospital, like I was going to ride a motorcycle across America. I bought the maps, I had the guidebooks, I had the whole thing worked out. I was also going to run my own advertising agency because, I had 8 months' experience. I could totally nail that. And that is actually what I went on to do. When I finally got out of hospital, I then set up my own little ad agency, and I had a little team of 4, and I ran it for 20 years. It had to be that way because I needed something really flexible. I still had my leg was quite a full-time job for quite some time, and I had to focus on that, but still needed to make a living. And then I became a breeder. I had 3 children, so I really needed a flexible business that would give me the opportunity to do those things. And I loved it. I worked for all sorts of clients. I bore easily. So that suited me beautifully, jumping from one client to the next, one brief to the next, in a studio one day and in the art room the next, and I loved it. And then, as all people who bore easily, end up doing, I was bored again because I was used to that constant pace. And so I started looking for what I call chasing squirrels, which is when you're focused on your main body of work and what you need to get done and your billable work, but then you're looking for other things that interest you, a squirrel to chase, an interesting idea, something you'd like to nail. They actually do that quite religiously at Google, where their staff are given 4 days a week to work on their usual job description and 1 day a week or 20% of their time to chase a squirrel, to really chase an idea or a concept, something that has nothing to do with their job description. And that's how Google Maps came about, and that came out of a team in Australia who wanted to chase a squirrel that was this mapping idea. So I was always looking for a squirrel, and my very first major squirrel that I chased really hard was the childbirth squirrel. So I had my own kids, and I'd had a doula at the birth of my first baby, and so I trained to be a childbirth support partner, or doula. That wasn't very well known in Australia at the time. It's really common in the States and the UK, but we're a little bit behind the rest of the world. Even though we're ahead in timing, we tend to be a few decades behind on things like that. So I was one of the first trained doulas in Australia, and I loved it because I could still run my ad agency. Babies are often born at night. You get called out to a birth, you rub her back, tell her she's awesome, make sure her partner doesn't get in the road, and then I'm back at my desk, sitting at my desk by 9 a.m. the next morning, and nobody knew. So I loved doing that. It was a great squirrel to chase. But at the very first birth I attended, this gorgeous couple, the baby's name was Genevieve, I still remember. And I noticed at that very first birth that the dad, he really wanted to help this woman. He really wanted to do the best thing. But he just kept cocking it up. And I realised no one had actually explained to this dude what is required of men when their partner gives birth. We expect them to be there, but we don't tell them what to do or what not to do. And I'd noticed that the job of the doula had really become rubbing her back and telling her she's awesome and making sure he doesn't act like a monstrous dick. So I thought there's a big gap there. There's a big piece of communication that's missing in that childbirth world. And as a communicator, I know perfectly well that you need to use the language of your audience. And that applies in any industry. If you're killing your audience with jargon, you just confuse them and they don't know what you're talking about. You need to use the language of your audience. And so I created the world's first childbirth education program for men. And it's run in pubs. And it's run all over Australia, and it's still going strong. And that was such a success because it was using the communication style of the audience. It was using man speak. And I figure if you put someone in their natural habitat, for a dude, it's a pub. You put him in his natural habitat, he's much more likely to listen. So it was incredibly successful, to my delight. I still remember one event I ran in Melbourne. And a guy walked in just with a beer in his hand, looking a little bit confused. And I said, "Is your partner pregnant by any chance?" He said, "Yeah, she just dropped me, told me to come upstairs, said there was a surprise for me." So about 80% of the men who attended these classes were booked in by their partner, and they just showed up. And that's actually where I learnt my skills in sharp, punchy storytelling and presenting, was presenting those classes to a room full of men who didn't actually want to be there. So I had to get them on board really fast and keep the pace moving nice and fast. So that was my first big squirrel I chased. I really enjoyed that one. And then I wrote a book that came out of that, and I'm working on the second edition of that book. It's called Cheers to Childbirth, and it's a specific childbirth guide just for men. And it's full of interviews with men telling their birth stories. Nobody asks men how they coped when their partner gave birth. They dare not say it was tough on them, but it was an amazing opportunity to talk to these famous men and ask them what it was like for them. You know, world champion boxers crying as they told me what it was like becoming a dad. So that was such a cool squirrel. My next squirrel had a childbirth flavour to it. I was sitting at home breastfeeding one of my babies, and I was watching the Oprah show. And on the Oprah show came a little old lady. Her name is Catherine Hamlin, and I had never heard of her. She was about 80-something, 85 at the time. And she came on the Oprah show and told this beautiful story about how she was working in Ethiopia, curing women with catastrophic childbirth injuries. Now, I had just had a baby of my own, and I was hormonally disadvantaged to a story about women suffering in childbirth. And so she had me by the ovaries. I was all ears. And I thought, I need to contact this woman, see if I can help her. So I did. I became a donor. And what I did was I gave my doula fees, I set my doula fees to the same price as an operation in her hospital in Ethiopia. And that was just the coolest thing to do. It was a skill set I had. It was a need that I could give, and I could give those funds to the hospital so that a woman could have her dignity restored. The main side effect of these injuries is incontinence, and it was only costing $450 Australian dollars to do one of these operations. It just seemed like a no-brainer to me, and just the warm fuzzies left, right and centre was such a cool squirrel to chase. But you know, when you start giving money to charity, they start sending you their stuff. And I was an art director, graphic designer, photographer, writer. I ran this agency, so I knew how to make things look good, and their stuff looked terrible. So I rang their little office, their little fundraising office, and said, look, your visual communication is doing you damage. Let me help you. And there was a long pause. So I'd found the author of the ugly newsletter. Long, agonising pause, and he said, my dear, I have been waiting 10 years for someone like you to come and take this awful job away from me. He was a retired Anglican minister, and he used to climb into a cupboard with his computer and try and do these newsletters for the hospital. And so again, I had the skill set and I could help, and it was so much fun. I took them on as my favourite pro bono client, so I didn't make a cent. But very quickly I was travelling to Ethiopia, mainly because I complained that they didn't have very good images. So be careful what you complain about, because I was very quickly vaccinated to the eyeballs and on a plane to Ethiopia, which at the time I couldn't have told you where that was on a map. I was just getting on a plane and going with my camera. And my camera has been an amazing ticket to, it's like a backstage pass. The bigger your camera, the more people seem to trust you. And I could roll up, except in Ethiopia when you arrive, they're very suspicious of journalists. And I remember once arriving and my bag was full of incontinence medication. So a huge suitcase chock full of incontinence medication. And every time I went over a bump, you could hear them rattle. For all they knew, that was a whole stack of ecstasy in my suitcase. But all they cared about was my camera, and they were sure that camera could actually have some kind of bomb device in it. And I still remember the guy in Ethiopian customs asking me to point my camera at his head and fire it. I'm like, dude, if that's a bomb, we're all out of here. So I had such a ball doing that, because I offered, because I showed up, because I had the skills and they needed it. For 8 years, I travelled to Ethiopia every year, and I'd do a big shoot, and I got to know Catherine really well, her patients really well, the issue of obstetric fistula, which happens in all countries where women don't have access to good hospital care. I really loved it, and I was gradually letting my agency die a slow death, because I was a bit bored with that work. And then when Catherine was 87, she said to me, Lucy, I'm not getting any younger, and I need to shore up my legacy. Will you be the CEO of a brand new health charity, a charity that will raise funds for my work long after I'm dead? And I didn't need any thinking time, because I was bored with my agency. I remember the big client that we had, the big cash cow, when we wound up the business, sold hinges and drawer runners. It was so exciting I could stab myself in the eye. And so I really happily said to Catherine, yes, I'll be your CEO. And I dived into this role as a CEO of a not-for-profit. I had never done anything like that before. It is so different when you are running private enterprise to then be answering to board of directors. I had to develop a constitution from scratch, build a board, all of that work had to be done. Incredible learning experience and incredible output to be raising funds for this work in Ethiopia. We raised $7 million in 2.5 years, and then one day, without warning, I remember coming back from the States, landing on the tarmac, turning my phone on, and I was fired by text message by a board of 3 volunteers. And I couldn't believe it. I did not see that coming. We were doing so incredibly well. And they said to me, Lucy, you raised too much money. I was like, what? That was my main KPI, was raising money. They said, you've raised too much money and you've really pissed some people off. And I didn't realise this. I thought we were all on the same page. We were all just raising as much money as we could. But I didn't realise that I had gone from nobody, just this funny photographer with pink hair, to the single largest stakeholder in that hospital in 6 months, I'd gone from nobody to the single largest stakeholder. And I didn't realise that was a bad thing. I didn't realise that that not-for-profit world is an awful lot about looking good on top of doing good. And I wasn't ready. I didn't realise this same page didn't exist. Some people say I failed at stakeholder management, but whatever. It was heartbreaking. So I had to move on. That's the only way. The only direction is to move forward. And I had adored that work so much and really made it part of my identity that it was probably good for me to move on and to find something new and a new challenge. And then just to make life interesting, a month after I was fired from that role, my husband asked me for a divorce. So 2015 I like to refer to as the year of the shit sandwich. That was a really tough year, and I recommend anyone who, when everything starts to hit the fan, just run from your problems. Run. That's what I did. I booked a flight and I went to Africa. And I just did the runner. I just didn't want to deal with it immediately. And it was so much fun. I went and rode horses up the beach in Mozambique, and nobody cared who I was, didn't know who I'd worked for. All they cared about was that I could ride a horse fast and I could drink fast. So I used to be able to talk fast, type fast, but I can ride fast and drink fast, and that was the best thing at that time in my life. Then I went on to run a charity in Cambodia, and that was a different challenge. Cambodia is a very, very challenging place. There are more poor people in Cambodia than there are more NGOs, than there are poor people in Cambodia. It is run by NGOs, and I really did feel like if we wound up our operation, all the kids and families we were caring for would be easily absorbed into other organisations. So I really struggled in that role. I also noticed that I'm a start-up person rather than a fix-up person. It is so much easier to create something fresh from scratch that's all digitally streamlined and nice and organised than it is to take something analogue, something old-fashioned, something non-digital, and bring it into the 21st century, and to bring those people with you who were really happy doing things the old-fashioned way. That was an enormous challenge. Then I moved into consulting, which has been a really interesting beast, and I love it that I can just choose the projects that float my boat. And my last project that I really loved, I went on holiday to an island in the Philippines called Noa Noa Island. It's off Palawan, and it was just stunning. But I looked at their website and I said to the owner, Andy, your visual communication is doing you damage. Let me help you. And it took a while, but 2 years later he said, yes, Lucy, I'm ready for you to rebuild this website. And I said, Andy, I'm really sorry, but I can't do this job remotely. I really need to be on the island, don't you think? To rebuild this, I need to drink the cocktails, I need to snorkel the reef. He said, sure, Lucy, and I went to the Philippines and sat on the beach with Andy and built his website in one furious week. We'd build in the morning and snorkel in the afternoon. But the first thing I changed, which made a huge difference to their occupancy rate, was it was only for adults. And so the website said everywhere that it was adults only. I said, Andy, that means something different where I'm from. He said, we don't want to say child-free. We think people will misunderstand and think that means that the children come for free. I went, no, that's not what that means. So all we did was change it to child-free and change the visual direction of it because it's a stunning island. And suddenly occupancy went up 50% because people knew they weren't going to a swingers island suddenly. So those communication skills from way back have been a very, very helpful set of skills. So much of what I've done in my career has required courage, certainly not just from me, from the people I've worked with, from the beneficiaries, these beautiful patients in Ethiopia who use everyday courage just to get through life. And I've worked out that courage is really just that feeling of fear in your guts and stepping over that fear and doing it anyway. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of courage that it takes to jump out of a perfectly good aeroplane into a war zone or to walk out of a violent marriage. I'm talking about everyday corporate courage. I think the biggest courage I've shown in my career is hair courage. So I'm talking about corporate courage to have good ideas and try new things. So that fear in your guts is really interesting. There's a huge connection, a much greater connection than we ever thought between the gut and the brain. There's a nerve called the vagus vagus nerve, and it's like an information superhighway between your gut and your brain. And there's 7 lanes going to your brain and only 1 lane coming down to your gut. So that suggests that the gut is the director, the master of ceremonies, that when you say that I've got that feeling in my guts or that gut feeling, that actually really matters, and it's your gut directing your brain. So when you feel that fear in your tummy, you know that there's a response to what you don't want to do, and then you need to make a decision and actively override the gut so that the brain tells the gut that you can do it, to step over that pain and just do it, that awful feeling in your gut. Some people feel fear in their chest. Most people feel it in their gut. I find that most people, or the most common fear in business is the fear of no. So many people are afraid to cop a no that they won't even ask the question. And I've noticed that no is not a terminal condition, that no is just no for now. So that you just have to ask in a different way or at a different time or come at it at a different angle. I have turned so many no's into yeses by taking it off email and actually asking the question in person. People are much less likely to say no to your face than they are in an email. So don't give them the opportunity to say no. Let me give you a great example of fear of no. I did a post on my social media, and it was a lazy post. It just said, "Fortune favours the brave." And the very next day, I received an email from a woman, and she said, "Lucy, I saw your post yesterday, and it's given me the final nudge to send you an email. I've been afraid to contact you." So she had my full attention, because I thought, why on earth wouldn't you just ping some random lady on the internet an email? So I keep reading. She said, "I'm an Indigenous woman in the countryside, and my sister is in the countryside, another part of the country. We've just launched a digital business, and it's flunked. We have not had one sale. We can't work out what the problem is. Would you be willing to mentor us in the digital space?" So she had my attention even more so. Unreal. Indigenous woman in the country trying to nail it on an online business. And I love that digital space because it's all about search engine optimization, which is just a word game. It's a game to find out how you can nail a particular keyword and be the number one result in that key phrase. It's that easy. The best fun, best game. And I kept reading, and she said, "It's an online sex shop." So then I she had my full attention. I kept reading again, and she said, "I'm really sorry, Lucy, but we can't pay you in money. We can only pay you in sex toys." I bet you have never had an offer like that in the conference and events industry. Believe it or not, I've had that offer twice in my career. I burst out laughing as I'm reading this email, and I'm at home. My mum was cooking dinner for my kids, and my mum trots out of the kitchen and says, "What's so funny?" Now, my mum is a Baptist pastor, and I said, "Mum, don't worry, just know you're getting a dildo for Christmas." I knew I'd get it in there somewhere. So imagine if that chick had been afraid to send me that email and just ask me the question. And I thought, what's the worst thing that could have happened? And that's what I call my Lucy Bloom risk management framework. Ask yourself 2 questions. What is the worst thing that could happen? And the second question is, will anybody die? And usually in our industry, the chance of someone dying against a decision you make is pretty slim. So have a look at what is the worst thing that could happen if you ask this question, or if you launch this idea, or if you test a concept. I remember when I published my book for the first time, Cheers to Childbirth, I self-published that book. And I thought to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could blow all the cash on these books. I could live with that, I guess. And every time I drove into my garage, there'd be 70 cartons of books looking back at me, telling me I'm a loser. I thought, I can deal with that. And so I did. And that book has been a bestseller because people keep breeding. And so that book keeps selling. I get a new market comes through. About every 3 months, a whole new market of people come through going, "Oh my goodness, my partner needs to know how to support me through the birth." And they rush out and buy my book. So it was a risk worth taking. So I encourage you to do that. Take a look at the things that you fear Eleanor Roosevelt says, do something every single day that scares you. And by that she means something that you feel a bit uncomfortable about, something that you'd rather not do. I have a tea towel from home. Whenever I visit a new city, I buy a tea towel. So I'll be getting one in Barcelona. And I have a tea towel from Queenstown, a beautiful city in New Zealand. And it's got a picture of a woman wrestling a crocodile, and it says, do something every day that scares your family. And I love that one. Do something every day that scares your family. That courage nerve that you need to exercise is something not to overlook. So don't just sit there and wait for something really difficult to befall you before you practice the art of courage and being brave. And I call it testing your nerve. So push yourself to do those things. Push yourself to do things that you don't really like doing. I, for example, hate reconciling my bank accounts. It is such a drag. And I would leave it for 3 months, and then it becomes this beast of a job. So now I do it every single day. I go to the gym, and the first thing I do when I get back from the gym is reconcile 2 bank accounts that I have. And sometimes there's no transactions, and there's a green thumbs up waiting for me when I get back from the gym. I've turned this task that I hated into something that's a reward. I gamify everything where possible. But testing your nerve is an important thing to do to push yourself beyond your usual skill set. Here's a beautiful example. When I was running my agency, I had a client who owned huge tracts of land in far north Queensland, which is where everyone wants to go on holiday. And they said to me, Lucy, we bought this big parcel of land. We want you to go up there, shoot it all, but we also need some aerial footage. Didn't seem like an unreasonable request. This was the world before drones. But what the client didn't know was that I was desperately afraid of flying. In those days, I was so afraid of flying. I've since overcome that fear by sitting next to a pilot on a flight once, and he explained it all to me, and now I don't even think about it. But back then, the thought of flying really bothered me. But the client wanted it, and so I said yes. So many of my courageous things that I have done have just been because I don't want to look like a fool when I say to the client, no, I can't do that. So I did. And I flew to Cairns, which is a 3-hour flight from Sydney, landed in Cairns, and I thought, if I check into my hotel, I will never come out. I need to just go straight to the heliport and just go on, just keep moving forward on autopilot. And I did. Got my car, drove around to the heliport, walked in, told the lady I need to charter a flight to shoot some aerial footage. She went, oh, we could do that right now. So there was no getting out of this challenge, this pushing of my nerve. I went, okay. I signed my life away on these documents. I paid $1,000 for the privilege of packing death. And then I remember signing these papers and looking out the side of this office. It was like a hangar onto where the heliport was. There's a helicopter. And the pilot is walking towards the office with the door of the helicopter in his hand. And he's shouting, do you want the door on or off? Because photographers normally want the door off. And so I think I was just a bit delirious by then. I went, fine, no door, that's okay, whatever. Who needs a door? And then we get into this helicopter, and it was the most amazing experience. Those things just lift off the ground, no momentum, nothing. Has anyone been in a helicopter? Yeah, all the rich people are nodding. So we take off, and I don't know, I just needed a little bit of extra reassurance, and I had headphones on and a button on my headphones to talk to the pilot, and I pushed the button and I said, excuse me, I'm the mother of 3 and I really need to survive this flight. That's what I said to him. And he replied, now Queenslanders in Australia are a bit of a different breed. They're like Northerners in England. He pushes the button and goes, that's all right, darling. I'm the father of 4 and it's chicken for dinner tonight. That is what he said to me, but it was so calming because I thought, well, there's 7 kids waiting for us to get home between us and a chicken has already been sacrificed. So we should be fine. And I just sort of forgot that we were flying through the air and I just had my job to do and I'm madly shooting, and I would point to some islands and he would just bank the bird over these islands, and I'm literally hanging at the bottom of a helicopter shooting away, and shot the best footage I've ever shot in my career. Imagine if I hadn't had the guts. Imagine if I'd said to my client, I'm not fond of flying, I'd really rather not. Oh, I was so pumped. We landed and I'm there. I'm going, this is awesome. I'm on fire. I'm in Queensland all by myself. What else can I conquer? I'm just going to write something else off, tick it off my list. And so I got in my car. I made a couple of calls. I drove one suburb away and I went for my first Brazilian wax. Yeah, that really hurt. And apparently I have very deep follicles. So I walked back to my car, and I don't know about you, but I talk to my steering wheel a lot. And I got back to my car and I said to my steering wheel, I think that's enough for one day. And I put that to an end. But you know what's a lot more fun than pushing your own nerve is pushing the nerve of the people who report to you. Way more fun. I remember once I interviewed a woman for a job, and in her interview she said to me, I'm not much of a computer person, which I would suggest is a really bad thing to say in an interview, no matter what. And she didn't get the job, and I had to go travelling, and when I got back a few weeks later, she'd been given the job in my absence. Oh well, so she was going to be my right-hand woman, and I remembered that thing about I'm not a computer person, and so I put her in charge of IT. I'd learnt this in Cambodia, that what they do in Cambodia is you put the person who is the biggest offender of a problem and you put them on the chair of the committee that's put together to conquer that problem, because the biggest offender of the problem knows all the ins and outs. They know that they're all drunk by 10 a.m. They know nobody buys alcohol. They all make it themselves. They know all those ins and outs. So they're the perfect person to put in charge of conquering it. So she was the head of IT, and she did a brilliant job because she came at it with zero knowledge, and she did a brilliant job very quickly. So much so, she was even in charge of a project where she had to write an API. So she had to deal with offshore programmers, use their lingo, brief them properly, move this project along, and we developed an API between two online platforms that was so great that we sold the API to one of those platforms. So there we were, a charity raising funds for a hospital in Ethiopia, and we had a non-computer person developing APIs. So pushing people out of their comfort zone is a wonderful thing to do. Then a few months later, I remember hearing her, she didn't say it to me, she said it to someone else, I'm not much of a runner. And so I sent her to Ethiopia to run against Ethiopians at altitude. And she was right, she was a crap runner. But what she discovered was she was a brilliant leader of small groups, and that she took a team of 12 people and they raised $250,000 doing that run. It was only 10 Ks, and she was a terrible runner, but she really did find that was her, I don't like using the word passion, that was her purpose. She loved it. It was so much fun, and she was incredibly good at it. So push yourself, test your own nerve, and test the nerve of those who report to you. It's way more fun. Now, so much of my work has been about kindness, because that's that charity sector. So much of it is doing work for others. But I have found that kindness is a boomerang. And no matter how much kindness you can pour out in your personal life, in your business models, it will just keep coming back to you, not from the recipient of your kindness. It never works that way. When you pour kindness out, it comes back to you in other ways. And believe it or not, it will feed your bottom line. When you show kindness to others, it lowers your blood pressure. It improves your immune system. There's a bunch of new research that shows that the more kindness you show to others, the longer your life expectancy. So who would have thought that looking after others would actually be looking after you? And the cool thing about kindness is you can't overdose on it. It's free. There was some really cool research on some rabbits, and the research had nothing to do with kindness, but there was one group of rabbits that was doing exceptionally well in this study, and scientists couldn't quite work out why or how. They looked a bit closer, and those were the rabbits whose research scientist was incredibly kind to them, and they got cuddles and pats every day. And that has triggered a whole lot more research into kindness. Have a look at your business model. Wouldn't it be brilliant if every single budget that you put together, every single strategic plan, every template that you have in your business for these planning things has a section in it for kindness? How is that budget? Is there a dollar sign that you can put towards delivering kindness from this strategy, from your event? And think broader than charitable donations. That's a really obvious top-level way to show kindness. I remember working with an organisation that they were in real estate, and for every building they sold, they would count the number of bathrooms in that building that they sold, and then that's the number of bathrooms they would fund, toilets that they would fund in Cambodia. So a really nice connection to what they did as a business. Their customers would love it. But there are other ways and deeper ways to look at showing kindness, and it should go in all directions. Now, I never imagined as the CEO of a charity that when volunteers came to work for us, that I was being kind to the volunteers. It didn't occur to me. I felt the kindness direction was coming our way, with all these people willing to give their time and work for us for nothing. But about a year into that, I discovered there were two women who were some of our hardest working volunteers. And don't get me wrong, I treat volunteers like staff. If they're crap, I fire them. We can't be babysitters. They've got to be awesome team members as well. But I found out about a year later that those two women, really, really hardworking women, were volunteering for us as part of their recovery from cancer. And we'd given them this daily, they used to come 2 days a week, this 2-day-a-week opportunity to get out of the house and not be a cancer patient. And none of us knew that that was their story until well into that. I never realised there was all this kindness going back in their direction. I run an intern program, and honestly, I need an intern like a hole in the head, but I do enjoy, I guess I'm getting that lower blood pressure boost by being kind to these really young, usually they're university students, and they come to work with me and they sit right alongside me, and I give them a huge amount of responsibility, and I spend a lot of time on them. But it comes back my way as well. They give me 40 head hours a week to plough through, usually consultancy work, often website builds. So I show them some kindness, but they give me so much of their time. And honestly, those are the most loyal workers you will ever have. I can't speak more highly of running an internship program, and get your first intern to design the program, because they'll know exactly what interns are looking for. So kindness rolls out in lots of ways in your business. Make sure that you're also being kind to the CEO. It's really lonely up there. The CEO can be friendly with you but can't be friends with you. So the CEO gets left out of things. Their birthdays get forgotten. So make sure you're looking after the people right at the top, not just the people coming in at the bottom. Now, optimism is a crucial part, I guess, of my style and of the style of anyone I have worked with in my career who has been incredibly successful and created enormous momentum behind them. Optimism, kindness, courage, all these things filter down from the top. There's this herd, the way herds behave is they will respond to and emulate whoever is in charge, the more senior, and that happens with animals and humans. So if you have from the top down, if your management is optimistic about success and looks at how this project can succeed before they're looking at how it can fail, that will filter through to the rest of the team. I also think it's crucial to celebrate success, almost no matter how small. I find it frustrating when people celebrate every single win. Like, yeah, we made it to lunch. Yeah, not so much. But celebrate the successes that you've been aiming for as a team. And I'm huge on that. I had a CFO, really cool guy who was my CFO for a long time. And we had a very different style. He was perfect CEO. I'd be the kind of person who would say, yes, let's do this. And he'd go, oh, are we insured? And his name was Alex. And one day we had an open plan office, and Alex just quietly said to me, oh, excuse me, Lucy, we've just hit the $6 million mark. This was for revenue. I had no idea we were travelling quite that fast towards that goal. I said, Alex, are you serious? I needed to know that. We need like one of those big thermometers in the office. I need you to report on numbers every day so we know how quickly we are travelling. Alex and I would speak at least weekly about that total figure, but I didn't realise how fast it was tracking. So I said, Alex, we're going to aim for the 7 million, okay? We're going to celebrate this amazing milestone. You're going to report daily, thermometer. It's going to be wild. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to put a net above your desk. I still remember saying this to him word for word. There's going to be a net above your desk. It's going to be full of balloons balloons and sparkles. And when we hit the 7 million, you're going to pull the chain and flood the office. And you know what he said? Oh, I'll do it on a Tuesday because the cleaners come on a Wednesday. Like, far out. I said, Alex, why don't we just cut out the middleman and release the balloons straight into the bin? It's like, so, oh man, my team really thrived on that celebrating of success, but sometimes you need to drag people along. It has to filter down from the top. Now, I think fun is a crucial part of doing business well. Absolutely crucial. If your staff are having fun, they stay longer. If your customers are having fun, they will buy more often. Fun is absolutely crucial. I remember thinking, how can we make it fun for our patients to be in hospital? How can we make this fun? It's awful. That awful surgery, that 3-week recovery time. We ended up bringing in a circus, a local circus, and these women had never seen anything like it in their lives. And we had a ball. The staff had a ball. Patients loved it. So have a look at how you can deliver fun. Same with kindness, optimism, fun. How can you make what you do really fun? I'm going to leave you with a really cool story. And this story, if there's any industry that knows how to plan, it's conference planners. You plan, and then you just have to dive in and go. And this story really illustrates that no matter how much you plan, when it happens on the day, sometimes you just have to haul courage from somewhere and go with the flow with grace. So I bet you came to this convention thinking you were going to hear a birth story, and you are. So my middle child was due on New Year's Eve, and so we thought we were fine to have our usual big shindig in mid-December. So on that night, as guests started walking down our driveway, so I got the first contractions. And the invitation had said, Lucy promises not to give birth on the night. So these guests started arriving, contractions started, and I thought, yes, excellent. I'm going to have this baby tonight or tomorrow. I was so sick of being pregnant. My first birth had taken 24 hours, so I thought, brilliant. I've got time. I've got $200 worth of sausages to cook. I've got Santa climbing over the back fence at 8 o'clock. People are pouring through my front door. And within half an hour, I could not speak through contractions. And I thought, I'm going to have to opt out of this party. I can't stick with this any longer. And so I went to my then husband, who was in the backyard having a beer, and I said, meet me in the bathroom, which was probably not enough information. And I just burned up the backyard, up the hall, and I skidded into our TV room and turned up the stereo really loud, because when I gave birth the first time, I shouted that hospital down like there was no tomorrow. And I thought, I don't want everyone hearing me holler. So I cranked up the stereo, and I still remember the song was My Sharona. Best birth song ever. And then I burned into our bedroom, into the ensuite bathroom. I flicked on the lights, I flicked on the taps, I tore my clothes off, I jumped into the bath, and I turned around, and there was a really dear friend of mine standing in my bathroom with a newborn, her little newborn on her shoulder, and she was patting her little 3-week-old off in the cool dark of the bathroom when I came skidding in there. And we had done girl guides together, and we had been so naughty. We'd set fire to things. We had just done so much naughty stuff. And I remember there was this moment where I looked at her and I said, how did it come to this? Anyway, she just burst out laughing and said, I'll go organise a midwife, and vanished. Then I had 2 contractions on my own, those kind of tippy-toe contractions that you forget about until you're doing them again. And then my husband appears at the door of the bathroom. So I've got my hands on the tiles like this, and as he walked in, the baby's head popped out. And she was in the anterior position, so she was looking at him. And he's standing there with a beer in his hand, and he goes, what shall I do? And I think I was so calm because I had attended so many births as a doula by that stage that I just knew it was all going to roll in a pretty straightforward way. And I looked at him and went, dude, what do you reckon? I said, put the beer down, because on the next push, this baby is coming out. And it wasn't a push. She rocketed herself out. I was a rocket launcher. She was the rocket. Her dad caught her on the full. And he put her in my arms, and the party's still raging out in the house. He put her in my arms, and I sat down in the bath, and she was perfect. She was gorgeous. She was all gooey. And the photos are perfect because I had a full face of makeup from the party. They are the best birth photos ever. And, she was just perfect. Then I had a shower. Midwife arrived. I was in all sorts of trouble because she couldn't get a park in our street. And she cut the cord and did the business end of the deal. And my husband staggered out into the party, killed the music and said, "I've just delivered our baby girl." And because of the invitation, people sort of thought it was a bit of a joke. And then he turned to the kitchen and said, "Can someone pass me a bowl for the placenta?" And that's when the penny dropped and I heard everyone go wild. And then I had a shower, got dressed, wrapped up my baby and went out back into the party and had champagne. So it was a pretty amazing way to have a baby and brilliant because the party raged on and then all my friends cleaned the house, pushed Christmas presents under the tree and left us alone for 6 weeks, which is exactly what you want. A few years later, I was standing in the main ward in the hospital in Ethiopia. And Catherine retold that story in her words to the patients. So it's a 140-bed hospital, and almost every single one of those patients has lost a baby. So for them to hear a positive, fun, happy birth story, it's like any piece of hope they want to hear. They want to hear that there's a possibility of a baby and a happy, safe birth. And Catherine told this story, and the nurses were translating it in the 4 main languages. And then at the end of the story, I got this beautiful, gentle round of applause from these patients. And then Catherine said, "And that's how all Australian women give birth." So there's this raging rumour in Africa that we just pull a party when we want to have a baby. So if you enjoyed my speech, you would love my book. It's a memoir called Get the Girls Out. I have 1 copy with me here, so if you come and give me like a big sloppy kiss, I might give you the 1 copy that I have. It's only available in Australia and New Zealand at the moment, unless you can wrangle it online. You might be able to get a copy online. So I've had so much fun up here today. You're a very warm audience. I will stick around and I'd love to meet every single one of you. So go forward with courage, kindness, optimism and fun, and maybe buy Mum a dildo for Christmas. Thank you.